The fate of William Afton's wife in Five Nights at Freddy's remains one of the most elusive and haunting mysteries in the entire narrative, largely because her absence feels deliberate rather than accidental. Unlike William, whose descent into murder and eventual transformation into Springtrap is carefully documented through layered minigames, secret endings, and environmental storytelling, his wife is never clearly shown, named, or given dialogue in the mainline games. Yet this silence surrounding her is not empty. It creates a narrative vacuum that demands interpretation. The Afton household is portrayed as fractured, cold, and emotionally unstable, particularly in the 8-bit segments of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, where the crying child wanders through a home that feels more like a stage set for trauma than a lived-in family space. There is no visible maternal presence offering comfort, mediation, or warmth. Instead, there is an oppressive atmosphere shaped by fear, neglect, and the looming shadow of William's secret experiments. Because the series is so meticulous in hiding clues within absence and implication, many fans believe that the lack of information about Mrs. Afton is itself meaningful, suggesting that her story is either intentionally obscured or meant to be pieced together symbolically rather than stated outright. One widely discussed theory is that Mrs. Afton died before the primary tragedies of the series unfolded, possibly even before the events leading up to the Bite of 83. This interpretation views her absence as literal rather than symbolic. She is gone because she is deceased, leaving William alone to raise their children in an increasingly unstable household. If this were the case, it would help explain the emotional vacuum that defines the Afton home. The crying child's extreme anxiety, Michael's cruel behavior, and William's cold detachment all suggest a family unit missing its emotional anchor. In many narratives, the death of a parent destabilizes children, particularly when the surviving parent is distant or abusive. If Mrs. Afton had died from illness or an accident, William may have spiraled further into obsession, channeling grief into his experiments with remnant and immortality. The idea that his research into preserving life through animatronics may have stemmed from an inability to cope with loss creates a tragic psychological dimension to his villainy. Rather than beginning purely as a monster, he may have begun as a grieving husband who twisted his pain into something monstrous. However, while this interpretation adds emotional depth, it remains speculative because the games never directly reference such a death, leaving the theory grounded more in narrative logic than explicit evidence. Another major theory suggests that Mrs. Afton did not die, but instead left William after discovering the horrifying truth about his actions. As William's behavior grew more secretive and erratic, and as children began disappearing around his restaurants, it is plausible that she became suspicious. The idea that she uncovered evidence of his crimes, perhaps overhearing conversations, discovering hidden blueprints, or noticing inconsistencies in his explanations, adds a layer of domestic thriller to the broader horror narrative. In this interpretation, she represents the last moral barrier between William and total moral collapse. When she realizes what he has become, she attempts to distance herself, either to protect herself or possibly to protect her children. The tragic dimension of this theory lies in its implications. Either she was unable to take her children with her, or William retained custody and continued his experiments unchecked. The Afton children's suffering would then be compounded by abandonment, not out of indifference, but out of helplessness. This theory preserves her humanity and frames her as a victim of William's manipulation and control, rather than as a passive absence. It also reinforces the series' recurring theme that evil often festers behind closed doors, hidden beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary domestic life. Perhaps the most intricate and debated theory is that Mrs. Afton becomes Ballora, the ballerina animatronic introduced in Sister Location. This theory relies heavily on symbolic parallels and thematic resonance rather than direct confirmation, yet it persists because of how strangely fitting it feels within the twisted logic of the series. Ballora's song, with its mournful lyrics about an empty room and a broken family, stands out among the animatronic's dialogue. It carries a tone of sorrow and longing that feels deeply personal, almost autobiographical. Some interpret this as evidence that Ballora is inhabited by Mrs. Afton's spirit, trapped within one of William's creations, just as Elizabeth becomes Circus Baby and William himself becomes Springtrap. Ballora's elegant yet restrained movements, her blindness mechanic in gameplay, and her constant circling of her stage have been read as metaphors for a mother searching for her lost children, unable to truly see or reach them. Thematically, this would complete a tragic symmetry in which every member of the Afton family becomes consumed by William's obsession with animatronics and immortality. The entire family would be reduced to haunted machinery, their humanity stripped away and repurposed as components in William's grotesque legacy. However, critics of the Ballora theory argue that the evidence remains circumstantial and possibly symbolic rather than literal. Sister Location is a game steeped in performance imagery, theatricality, and metaphor. Ballora may represent the concept of motherhood rather than embodying Mrs. Afton specifically. Her lullaby-like song could serve as a thematic reflection of the broken Afton household rather than a confession of identity. The series frequently blurs the line between metaphor and canon, leaving players unsure whether detail is meant to be interpreted literally or symbolically. In this light, Ballora could be an artistic manifestation of domestic tragedy, a personification of loss and fragmentation, rather than the physical remains of William's wife. This ambiguity keeps the theory alive, as there is just enough resonance to make it plausible, but not enough confirmation to make it definitive. There are even darker speculations that William himself may have killed his wife, either to silence her, out of escalating cruelty, or as part of his experimentation with remnant and death. While there is no direct evidence supporting this, it aligns disturbingly well with his established capacity for violence and manipulation. If he was willing to murder children for the sake of experimentation, eliminating an adult who threatened his secrecy would not be beyond him. This interpretation paints William as utterly devoid of humanity, someone who systematically destroyed not only innocent lives, but his own family in pursuit of control and immortality. It would also add a chilling layer to the Afton children's upbringing, suggesting that they were raised by the man responsible for their mother's disappearance. The psychological horror of that possibility deepens the already bleak tone of the series, though it remains firmly in the realm of speculation due to the lack of explicit narrative confirmation. Ultimately, what makes the mystery of William Afton's wife so enduring is that her absence amplifies the central tragedy of the Afton family. Whether she died, fled, was transformed into an animatronic, or was murdered, every theory underscores the same thematic core: a family destroyed from within by obsession, secrecy, and cruelty. The series repeatedly returns to the consequences of broken households and neglected children, and the missing mother figure becomes a silent symbol of everything that went wrong long before the first animatronic malfunctioned. Her undefined fate ensures that the horror extends beyond jump scares and haunted machines into something more intimate and unsettling: the slow erosion of a family consumed by one man's descent into madness.